The Life Tree by Júlia Rosell Saldaña. Introduction. Wars, power struggles, discrimination, domination. The known world was still in full reconstruction after the war between the alliance of free peoples made up of the Shektuk, the Farami, the Ishari, and the humans, and the Black Army, made up of orcs, goblins, trolls, and members of the races of the alliance of free peoples, discriminated against or with a predilection for evil. The war lasted 8 years and was started by a woman with magical powers who had lost her husband because of the king of humans. She spent decades searching how to amplify and improve her powers until one day she found an ancient artifact from the Golden Age with which she became the most powerful human in exchange for a curse. This woman, called Laupa, went down in the annals of history as a powerful and cruel leader who was able to unite the races that were not part of the alliance under one banner, that of the Black Army. In those 8 years, heroes were made and thousands of souls were lost. Big cities were razed and small towns ended up prospering with the arrival of refugees from the cities. Finally, the war ended when a group of mercenaries hired by the human king managed to reach Laupa's headquarters, and after an arduous battle, they killed her. With the death of their leader, the Black Army surrendered and its members scattered across the continent. Despite the surrender, there were still groups that wanted the rebirth of said army, while most of its members tried to get a normal life, and even some of its members became exemplary citizens wherever they lived, despite the discrimination that got weaker over the years. 1. Linnath. Our story begins with Laupa's son. The young man was 3 years old when his mother died at the hands of the heroes who ended the war. His mother, seeing herself losing, transferred part of his powers to her son without being aware that she also passed a curse on him. The poor young man grew up in prison, as he was considered a danger for the crimes of his mother. Everything he learned was from his fellow prisoners, most of them former members of the Black Army. It was precisely those former members who taught Linnath to control his powers and encouraged him not to follow in his mother's footsteps. After all, those fellow prisoners held him like a son and wished him no harm. Over the years, Linnath's powers increased and his curse became apparent, which was that he randomly turned into a monster. 20 years had passed since the end of the war and the kingdoms were prospering again, while the young Linnath was still locked up with the only fault of being the son of Laupa. His only wish in life was to remove the curse and lead a normal life, so over the years he concocted an escape plan to get out of prison and go to the Great Oracle, an ancient being with powers beyond the reach of the rest of the races, to ask him for help to eliminate his curse and his magical powers. Linnath just wanted to be free from the curse, and have a peaceful life. 2. Escape and gathering. One night of an electrical storm, lightning caused a fire in the castle founded on the dungeons where Linnath was. Since there were few guards, our young protagonist decided to escape. He turned to his mentors for his help, who scrambled to distract the few guards so he could flee. When it seemed that freedom was within his grasp, 2 patrols of guards prevented him from escaping through the castle gate. Perhaps by luck or perhaps by fear, Linnath was transformed at that moment into a being of more than 2.5 meters with superhuman strength. He pushed aside the guards as he apologized in a monstrous voice and ran out the castle gate as best he could. Being such a huge and certainly deformed being, he could not walk very fast. As he fled, the curse wore off and he was able to run to the caves of the Great Oracle. The guards were hot on his heels and Linnath was exhausted. He had never run in his life. After a few minutes of running, he saw the entrance to the caves. Despite the rain and the electrical storm, he entered the caves without hesitation, and when he could, he hid behind some boxes that were inside shortly after entering. The guards passed by, so when no one was around, Linnath stepped out from behind the crates and continued her search for him inside the labyrinthine caves. The cave, despite being natural, had doors and rooms of unknown configuration. It was also obvious that the corridors were full of traps that no longer seemed to work. Our protagonist continued to advance carefully while avoiding the guards who were after him. After hours touring the caves, he finally saw in the distance, coming out of a gallery, a wooden bridge over an underground lake. At the bottom of said bridge could be seen 2 huge golden gates with dragon motifs. As he stepped onto the bridge, he could hear voices coming from the gallery, and he turned to see a group of guards pointing at him. The young Linnath ran as much as he could across that battered bridge and in poor condition until he reached the golden doors, which he opened with force to the point that after managing to move them, he fell to the ground. Behind the doors was a large room decorated with luxurious fabrics, precious scented candles, gold treasures on one side, and in the center of the room, the great oracle, sitting on a throne. That being had blue skin. Despite being seated, it was easy to see that he was over 3 meters tall, his eyes were blank, and he stared at Linnath, who was lying on the ground. A few seconds later, the guards arrived, demanding that our protagonist surrender. Suddenly, between them and our protagonist appeared a levitating being, which looked like a hooded robe with nothing inside. The being demanded that the hostilities stop in the room and had a bream dialogue with the guards. Finally, the great oracle rose from his throne and ordered the guards to leave his inner sanctum. The guards, frightened, decided to pay attention. When they had gone, the great oracle approached Linnath and helped her to her feet, much to the displeasure of the floating being. She led him by the hand before the throne and sat down on it again. Once he saw that Linnath had calmed down, he told her that he was waiting for the question that was in front of him. Once again, the levitating being stepped between Linnath and the great oracle, demanding an offering to proceed with the consultation. The great oracle quickly silenced his eternal employee and waved Linnath to proceed. Our protagonist began to explain what was happening to him and asked if he could help him get rid of the curse that had plagued him since his early childhood. The great oracle's eyes lit up with a strange light, and he then told Linnath that he must get to the Tree of Life on the southeastern continent where he would find the answer he was looking for. Linnath tried to ask for more information, but was again interrupted by the levitating being who told her that it was already an honor to receive an answer from the great oracle without any payment or offering. The inhabitant of the inner sanctum began to speak with his servant in an unknown language, although it was clear from the reaction of the levitating being that what was requested was not to his liking. The being accompanied Linnath to a red metal door and opened it. He told the young man that to get to the southeastern continent, he had to enter the back galleries through the red door and choose whether to quickly reach the continent or explore the galleries full of war artifacts, a little as it would help him to culture. Linnath thanked him for the explanation and went through the red metal door, which closed when he was inside. 3. Fast travel and first contact. With the door closed, there was only darkness. Linnath tried to feel the walls since she had no means of illumination. After a few steps, torches began to light up, and Linnath could see that she was in a well-decorated place, with walls more like a castle than a house. He walked down the hall until she came to a room that smelled of perfume. In it, there was a huge rectangular table full of objects that he did not know. Food, and at the end of said table there was a being that seemed to be made of stone in a fetal position. At the far end of the room he could see a mirror that showed a forest, and to the right was a screen door that led to more lighted corridors. Linnath couldn't resist, and she began to eat as if she hadn't eaten in months. She immediately noticed a stone that seemed to be a mixture of amber with rubies, and picked it up. When he had it in his hand, the stone golem rose and was slowly approaching the young man, who began to walk backwards trying to avoid him. He collided with his back against the wall, and that being kept getting closer when he was right in front of him. The being snatched the stone from him and placed it back on the table, went to the bottom, and returned to the fetal position in which he was before. Linnath had a hard time calming down, but after succeeding, he approached the mirror where instead of his reflection, there was a lush forest, and he touched it. He first felt an icy cold, then he saw himself in a place that was not a place. He was in the middle of a brightly coloured nothingness that he was endlessly circling. He had unwittingly chosen the fast path to the southeast continent, confused and a little dizzy when he realised he was in the middle of a dark forest where the songs of the birds could be heard. He looked around to try to locate himself, but between the lushness of the forest and the fact that he had no idea where he was, it made him even more dizzy. As he tried to locate himself, he heard noises in the bushes to the left of him. He inched closer to see what it was, and a huge feline wild animal lunged for him. Despite the dizziness, Linnath cast a spell that sent the creature flying into the air. The moan of that animal continued for several seconds until it disappeared from sight. Proud to have driven that animal away, Linnath decided to look for some kind of town or settlement where he could ask how to get to the Tree of Life. Having no experience of life outside the castle dungeons, everything seemed huge and strange to him. He kept walking blindly through the forest where he did not find even a measly path. After several hours of strenuous walking through the vegetation, he saw a Shektak girl, who as soon as she saw him ran away in terror. Linnath started chasing after her as he tried to convince her that she didn't want to hurt him, she just wanted to talk about her. During the race, she tripped over something, and when she realised it, she was upside down encased in a net. He had fallen into a trap. Within seconds, a pair of adult Shektak appeared from the undergrowth. Linnath politely asked if they could get him down, to which the Shektak responded by asking what she was doing there. Linnath told them that she was looking for a way to the Tree of Life, which struck the Shektak as funny, and they laughed for a while. When they had exhausted their reserves of laughter, they took young Linnath down and offered him some drink, then led him to his village. As they got closer, they saw the wooden walls and how some huts protruded above. When they arrived, they found that the gates of the village were closed, and in front of them there was a guard who shouted for them to stop as they approached, asking for explanations of the presence of the stranger. The two hunters explained the situation to the guard, who laughed. He then told them that a woman had disappeared in the woods last night and they were looking for her. The doors would remain closed until something was known about her disappearance. Linnath asked the hunters if they had any idea where she might be, to which they suggested that there were some abandoned caves where there was once an underground temple. It would be most plausible to start looking there. Young Linnath, still dizzy and tired from the walk, snorted but mustered his strength to continue. The march was slow due to the slowness of our protagonist, but it did not take them long to reach the entrance of the cave. Frente a esta había un charco de agua hirviente y humeante, lo que indicaba que en aquella cueva había actividad volcánica. The group entered the cave and began to explore. Inside, warm air was breathed while the heat was unbearable. They searched the galleries until a strange being appeared before them, out of the shadows. That being looked like a kind of mix between an ape and a spider. It had 3 mouths, and it was noticeable that it was highly aggressive. The two hunters fought him until he broke their spears, at which point Linnath used a spell to paralyze the beast, which collapsed, unable to open either of its mouths. The two hunters rushed to smother the monster. When they were sure that he was dead, they kept going until they reached an area built, surely centuries ago, where there were symbols and drawings of the Shektak's ancestral culture. Linnath moved as close as possible to the gap in front of her. It seemed that an up-and-down mechanism was activated in that area. He was looking for how to activate it and found an elongated hole where some strange artifact should be placed. Unable to activate the mechanism, Linnath joined the team to search for the missing woman. As they advanced, the air became more unbreathable, but they did not give up. They arrived at a kind of cavern adorned in the ground by the bones of various animals, and they noticed that something protruded from among these bones. As they approached, they saw that what stood out were the clothes of a Shektak woman. They had found the missing woman, now mutilated and weighed down by hundreds of bones. The two hunters began to sob. Linnath didn't have much experience in the art of empathy or comfort, but he tried to make his two companions feel better, so he hugged them. As the tender scene unfolded, they heard something heavy on the other side of the cavern, crushing the bones in its path. When they looked there, they saw a grotesque being approaching them, like a bluish spider with no eyes or mouth. This time it was Linnath who took the initiative and cast a spell on the beast, which seemed to absorb the spell like a child absorbing the liquid from an iced drink through a straw, leaving only ice. Seeing the situation, the two hunters improvised weapons with the bones and launched themselves at that being with a rage that was difficult to contain. They wanted to avenge their fellow man. After a hard fight, they emerged victorious. They then decided to take the remains of the beast and handed the bloodied clothing to Linnath to show to the village guardian. 4. Village and Temple. When they arrived at the village with their clothes stained with blood and dragging the beast from the cave, the guardian was sad at first, but then he opened the doors of the village so that the new heroes could enter. As the gates opened, an almost paradisiacal village loomed before Linnath's eyes. There were small streams, beautiful plants, well-kept huts. It was the young man's first experience in an inhabited place, with people living a normal life. Something in him made her want to explore the village, and so she did. He played with the children, spent hours asking the neighbours about the most mundane things, tried drinks and food in the village canteen, and even ended up falling asleep on the street. The next day he woke up in a soft and fluffy bed, such as he had never been able to experience, and next to him a beautiful young shektuk served him breakfast. Linnath thanked her and asked how he could get to the Tree of Life, to which she replied that the village wizard surely knew as well as he did. When he finished breakfast, he went to the wizard's hut, who welcomed him and showed him magical artifacts and their use. Once he got tired of explanations, he asked the magician how to get to the Tree of Life to get rid of the curse on him, to which the magician replied that first he would have to see what kind of curse he suffered. He took out a strange artifact that was changing colour until it became a strong purple colour. The wizard was stunned and told him that his curse was so powerful that the magic he had extracted from him was of great power, so he offered to keep some artifact that he had in his hut. Linnath was going through all the artifacts until she saw a sword that caught her eye, so she asked the wizard if he could keep it. According to what he told her, that sword was magical and was capable of invoking small firestorms to eliminate the bearer's enemies. Satisfied with the exchange, the magician suggested that Linnath go see the master of the village temple, since he was much more knowledgeable than he was in matters of curses, and matters such as the Tree of Life. Linnath thanked him and went to see the temple master. The sanctuary was very well kept, clean, and exuded an aura of peace that the young man was not used to. When the Meister received him, Linnath told him of his situation, to which the Meister replied that he would require him to go deep into the ancient temple in the magmatic cave for a copy of the runes to give him further directions. The young man accepted, and the Meister gave him a flute, which was the key that would allow the elevator to work, and beeswax so that he could copy the runes, since the last copies they had had melted in the summer heat. Linnath took a deep breath, placed her sword on his back, grabbed some rations from the canteen and a canteen, and marched into the cave. Once he arrived, he grabbed the sword with one hand in case he was attacked and went to the elevator, where he placed the flute in the hole in the wall. Some mechanism was activated, and the sounds of heavy machinery began to sound. Linnath picked up the flute again. A few seconds later, the elevator arrived, which he got on. There was a small turret with several buttons, which Linnath deduced were the levels in the temple. To save time, he decided to start at the last level, pressed the button, and waited for the elevator to reach its destination. On that level, there was only darkness, so Linnath cast a light spell. A luminous ball appeared above his head and followed him everywhere. With light lighting the way, the young man saw that there was a long corridor ahead that led to a fork. When he arrived, he tried to glimpse what was on each path. He looked to the left and saw a corridor of infinite darkness with no end in sight, while to the right, he saw strange grooves digging into the wall. Curiosity got the best of him and he went for the one on the right. When he walked 6 steps, sharp blades began to protrude from the furrows. It was a trap. Linnath decided to lean against the wall and it gave way. He discovered a passageway that ran behind the blades. He didn't know if it was due to antiquity, bad design, or just plain luck, but he was grateful to be able to get through safely. After passing that corridor, he found himself in a rectangular room that's sloping down, and at the top, there was a large, unlit censer. Linnath went to said censer and decided to light it with its magic. That fragrance was magical. While he was clueless with the censer, a strange crackling was heard right above him. When he looked up, a ball of enormous dimensions was falling towards him. He began to run, while the huge ball chased him around the rectangular room until he tripped, made a hole in the floor and found himself face to face with the rune he was looking for. He used the beeswax to make several moulds and took care to protect them well, so that the Meister could use them and have more than one copy before summer came. When he came out of the hole, he noticed that the huge ball, which had stopped, had something shiny at the bottom. He approached and saw an arm severed and crushed, but it seemed still alive. He had a ring with a precious stone on his middle finger. Linnath didn't think twice and took the ring, after which the hand began to rot. The young man understood that what he had found was a ring of regeneration, so he put it on his middle finger and continued his journey towards the village again. But he went back to the elevator and pressed the button to go upstairs, when he began to notice strong tremors. Fortunately, the elevator was not damaged and Linnath did not lose her balance. When he reached the upper level, he started running towards the cave entrance. He realized, despite the noise of the tremors, that something was chasing him. Turning around, he saw several of those bluish arachnid beings behind him, so he turned around and drew his sword. He didn't have much training with weapons, but Linnath fought the creatures without using any spells as they seemed immune. Fortunately or unfortunately, the curse made an appearance, and the young man turned into a monstrosity who had no problem dispatching those beings. He finally reached the village and went to see the Meister, who told him, after studying the runes, that the answer would be found in the temple of the deepest forest. He instructed him that he should follow the course of the river until he reached a reed bridge, cross it and enter the ancient forest, where he should go to the ancestral temple that was still there. Linnath was a little upset, but he accepted the mission and set off in search of the bridge. After several hours of walking following the course of the river, he came to a reed bridge. He went through it and into that ancient forest. 5. The ancient forest. The forest he entered had nothing to do with the one he had travelled so far. The vegetation was not so dense, the air gave off a feeling of antiquity, the trees were much taller, and the wild animals gave the feeling of being in a constant state of fear. Linnath swallowed hard and began searching for the temple. He had nothing with which to orient himself, so he decided to leave marks with the sword where he passed in order to get some point of reference. As he headed deeper into the woods, a nagging sense of being watched began to unnerve the young man. He didn't know who, from where or what was watching him. Perhaps it was his imagination, he thought. As expected, and due to his history, Linnath fell into a hole which was a trap. He did not realize when stepping on some leaves that pretended to be the humus of the soil. He started screaming for help, but all he got was some kind of animal coming closer. He could hear it. He could smell it. That animal was slowly approaching, with the clear objective of devouring it. When the animal poked its slimy, filthy snout out of him, Linnath's reaction was to scream like he had never screamed before. Possibly the predator was not expecting it, for he too yelled his way and took a step back. Suddenly there was a hissing noise, and the predator was heard falling to the ground. 3 Shektuk leaned out and asked Linnath if he was all right. The answer was obviously no. They threw him a rope and helped him out of the hole. The 3 Shektuk presented themselves as members of a tribe that had decided to live like their ancestors, avoiding the sedentary luxuries of their relatives, thus creating a colony in the treetops and surviving by hunting and gathering food. Linnath appeared before these 3 Shektuk and told them of her need to go to the Tree of Life. Instead of laughing, these Shektuk became serious and informed Linnath that it was too dangerous a mission. Our protagonist told them about his curse, about what he had lived until now, and about the arachnid monsters that he met in the ancestral temple of the forest where he had been. If the Shektuk showed concern about the tree's mission, they now showed a nervousness they could not hide. They offered Linnath asylum in his shelter in the treetops, so they guided him there. When they reached the base of the main tree, a simple elevator awaited them. They took turns going up. As he went up, Linnath was delighted with the views because from there they were wonderful. The huts were finely built with quite basic elements, and different aromas intermingled and gave a feeling of peace and security. One of the Shektuk accompanied Linnath to see the shaman, who received him with delight and served him an infusion. The shaman questioned the young man about what he had seen, and when there was no more information to elicit, he asked him to get up and take a look at what he kept in the back of his hut. Linnath followed him and saw that he had one of those arachnid beings caged. He explained to her that those beings had actually been awakened by some kind of very powerful magic, since they were dedicated to devouring her. When Linnath approached, the being showed an interest too expressive for the shaman's liking, so he asked if he was carrying any artifact of great power. The young man showed him his sword and told him about the curse that hung over him. So the shaman explained that surely those beings had woken up after many years of lethargy by noticing a very powerful magical influence over the years. Linnath began to connect the dots and understood that her mother's magic as well as her curse could be to blame for the awakening of those beings. The magical influx must have continued for more than 40 years. She told his theory to the shaman, who was worried because, according to him, once they were awake, it was impossible to put them back to sleep until they had wiped out every magical being on the continent. The shaman went on to explain that many centuries ago, a terrible war had been waged between the Shektuk and the Ishari. Each side had its specialty, with the Shektuk being machinery and the Ishari being magic. Through forbidden and forgotten techniques, they created these beings to end the powerful magic of the Ishari, which was so effective that it ended their civilization. The remaining Ishari migrated to other locations, most notably the northwest continent, and started from scratch. On the contrary, the Shektuk felt so ashamed that they decided to live simpler cave agricultural lives, while some decided to return to a more primitive way of life, such as those who lived in treetop huts. The civilization of the Ishari was wiped out of existence by these creatures, while the Shektuk voluntarily decided to dispose of all their technology and civilization. Both races had lost their ancient power, and of course they were no longer enemies. Each one paid in his own way for the damage caused by that war, now a century or 1,000 years old. The shaman went on to explain that if he wanted to reach the Tree of Life, he must first go through the Temple of the Ancient Forest, and to open its doors, he would require a magic stone that could only be found in the underground ruins of the Ishari. That temple was the only joint construction between both races before the war, and lacking the necessary technology or magic, it was imperative that an Ishari magic stone be used along with the magical powers of Linnath's curse. The shaman called several young men and ordered them to accompany Linnath to the entrance of the ruins, since for them it was a cursed and forbidden territory. Pasaron por el elevador por turnos y se dirigieron a dicha entrada, donde dejaron a nuestro joven protagonista solo. Linnath se despidió de sus acompañantes agradeciéndoles que le hicieran de guía, lanzó un hechizo de bola de luz y entró a las ruinas bajo tierra, lo único que quedaba del imponente imperio Ishari. 6. The ruins. That was a gloomy and stagnant place, where it seemed that a cataclysm occurred. The buildings were buried between the roof and the ground. The roots of the trees got into any crack of said buildings, and everything seemed twisted, as if that civilization, somehow, was so decadent that the remains left behind could not correct the vices and problems of its inhabitants. At times there were tremors that indicated that the area was not very stable. Linnath kept moving forward, looking for any kind of clue about the magic stone, but the only thing he found for the moment is a pressing loneliness and some lost mole. On his walk, something surprised him. Passing near an abyss, he saw a light coming out of the ground. He realized that there was something buried in that part of the ground, so he began to dig. When he could see what was underneath, he realized that it was some kind of magical accumulator, so he cast a spell on the accumulator. Out of nowhere, a suspension bridge appeared, allowing passage across the abyss, so Linnath crossed it to reach a narrow corridor where, as she got closer, artificial lights came on from crystals in the walls. Surely those lights were activated by detecting a magical force. Following the lights, he came to a tower of magic typical of the ancient empires, where the magical arts were taught to the young and magic itself was studied. As he approached the doors, they automatically opened in his presence. Linnath couldn't help asking permission to enter and asking if anyone was there, but he only got the answer from the echo of himself. Seeing that there was no one, the young man entered and climbed the stairs to the top floor. When he arrived, he leaned against a crystalline structure on the side of the stairs, and the stairs began to glow and move as if automated. Linnath cursed himself for not using them sooner. On the top floor, he found what seemed to be an artifact that also accumulated magic, and inside was the lucky stone that had made him walk up some magical stairs. This last floor had a library already reduced almost to dust and with rusty volumes. A window on one side showed that it was at a height of about 30 meters. He walked over to the artifact and grabbed it with both hands. An electric sensation ran through his entire body, and he began to feel dizzy when he realized he was transforming back into the monstrosity caused by his curse. Despite this, he continued to hold tightly to that artifact while he felt that something in his body vanished, as if it were absorbed by a strange force. It got to a point where he couldn't take it anymore and passed out. Upon awakening, he saw that the device had exploded and the stone was accessible. He took it and prepared to leave. He calmly walked down the stairs, and when he reached the bottom, several arachnid beings were waiting for him. For some strange reason, they did not go upstairs and were agitated. With her path blocked, Linnath decided to go back upstairs, this time using the magical stairs, and headed for the window. When he raised his head, he saw that below at the entrance of the tower, dozens of those beings had gathered. He also saw that an underground river acted as a natural barrier between the tower and an uncharted area of the ruins. Looking to the side, he saw that there was a narrow ledge he could walk over, though he didn't know how far it went. The young man tied the stone with his clothes and prepared to go along that ledge. With a firm and slow step, he moved leaning against the wall of the tower until he came to a standstill. He could hear how those beings were chasing him from the bottom of the tower, waiting for him to go down or fall. 20 meters from the ledge, Linnath made a false step and slipped, falling downward. Fear was clear on his face. The cold sweat that broke out from the first step on the ledge mixed with the water as he fell into the underground river. Linnath tried unsuccessfully to grab hold of something while he struggled to stay afloat. The current was strong, and as he proceeded down the river, he saw that he was approaching a natural vault that had formed an underground lake. He began to hear some noises that indicated that something was following him on land. When he turned around, he saw that those beings were swarming after him, although they were intelligent enough not to jump into the water. In a little while, he was already in that immense lake, and he saw that in the center there was a rock formation and some wooden boards. He swam to that area and realized that the rock formation was actually a small islet with a hole in the center similar to the one formed by geysers. When he looked up, he saw that there was a hole through which the outside could be seen. He wondered if there was any way to get up there. Linnath took some planks and improvised a small raft using the roots that came down from the roof, while with the rest she made a small fire to dry and warm herself. On the shore of the lake, you could see how those beings were piling up, agitated and nervous, trying to find a way to get to where Linnath was. The young man realized that the tremors to which he had become accustomed indicated that the area was not stable and was surely connected much deeper underground with the volcanic cave in the other forest. Knowing this, he decided to make a rope with the roots, tie them to the raft, and go down the hole through which the noise of water and steam sounded every time the area resonated due to the tremors. Linnath went down and down until she almost reached the bottom, where she saw that there was almost boiling water because of the steam that emanated from it, and a crazy idea occurred to her. Even if it took a long time, if she managed to block the passage of the water, in the end, she would have died. A plug effect that would make him rise to the surface and, in the process, drown those beings that were chasing him. He concentrated and cast a spell on one of the sides of the underground river of boiling waters so that the passage of water would be blocked, but he had not calculated well, and that river was going faster than he expected. The water was accumulating as he made an effort to climb quickly. The liquid element that followed him was rising at breakneck speed, and Linnath was beginning to tire. When he reached the top, he held on tightly to the raft, and with his magic he made a thick barrier of ice over the hole. Beneath the thick layer of ice, you could see the water building up pressure on him as he melted it. Linnath set the raft right in the middle and held on as best he could. Within minutes, the water was so pressurized that it burst through the ice shelf, and a geyser launched the raft upwards, allowing Linnath to grab hold of a thick root that reached into the hole through which she surfaced. Linnath, exhausted by the experience, lay down on the ground to catch his breath. When he pulled himself together, he looked down the hole and saw that the water was rising much faster than he had originally calculated. From the surface, he could even hear the echo of the moans of those beings trying to flee from the rising water level. Having fulfilled his mission, the young man went to the hanging village of the Shektak to speak with the shaman. A deserved rest. Linnath was greeted with joy and as a hero in the village, since he had obtained the magic stone and had flooded the cursed ruins. Upon his arrival, a feast awaited him, a wreath of flowers and a celebration in his honor. Linnath was elated because the only thing he had ever celebrated in his life was birthdays in the dungeons. The Shektak of the village offered Linnath their eternal gratitude, his friendship, and offered him honorary membership of the tribe. Tears of emotion slid down his cheeks as he felt, for the first time in his life, loved for what he had done and not for who he was. Linnath was used to being hated or adored for the simple fact of being the son of the witch Laupa, so having a party in his honor for his actions was something he would remember all his life. When the celebration ended, the Shektak escorted him to a hut where he could rest and settle in before departing for the ancestral temple, part of his way to the Tree of Life. Linnath lay on the bed smiling as he never had before, and fell asleep. The next day, he prepared to eat in communion with his new friends and told them that he wanted to spend a day with them before setting off. The Shektak gladly accepted the request of his new brother. They accompanied him to the hut of the herbalist, a young and slender Shektak named Diadis, who had decorated the hut with all kinds of plants. The aroma was intoxicating, and it didn't take long for them to forge a very special bond. For Linnath had knowledge of herbs, mushrooms, plants, and the like that grew in the dungeons and were used to heal and treat her imprisoned friends. They both spent the whole morning exchanging knowledge about plant healing, until, as expected, something happened between them that would mark Linnath forever. The day passed quickly with the graceful company of Diadis, and although Linnath did not want the day to end, it was time to join the rest of the tribe to eat and go to sleep. Again, that communal meal was full of stories of the day-to-day of the different members of the tribe. For Linnath, this was a party, and he joined in explaining his adventures since his escape from the dungeons. As was evident, he became a hero to the smallest of the tribe, who harassed him with questions to the point of not letting him eat in peace. After the nightly feast, Linnath went to sleep in her hut, Realisate, the ancient temple. The next day, Linnath was awakened by the tribe's shaman, who had Linnath accompany him to his hut to show him something. The shaman went to the back of the hut and brought with him something wrapped in a cloth that seemed ancient, gently removed it, revealing a strange artifact of impossible shapes. It was evident that this was a machine, surely one of the ancient Shektak. The shaman explained that this artifact was one of the 2 keys needed to open the door of the temple, just as the magic stone was the other. The 2 met up with a group of Shektak ready to march to the temple and explore it. Once they were all gathered, they went to the temple. The journey through that immense forest was long, exhausting, and treacherous. The Shektak took the opportunity to introduce hunting and survival skills to Linnath, who was not very adept at his survival skills outside of magical or armed fighting. They also taught him how to avoid the traps, because during the journey, he had fallen into almost all of them by himself. After several hours, they finally reached the entrance of the temple. Before them loomed a stone arch set into the mountain. It seemed that some stones were in a fan position and impeded the passage. At the top of said arch were 2 recesses, one for the Ishari stone and one for the Shektak machinery. The shaman and Linnath had to juggle their way to the top of the stone arch, but when they did, they used their respective keys and climbed down. There was a creaking sound, then a sound of machinery, and finally those fan-shaped stones retracted, leaving the entrance clear for the group to pass through. As they entered, torches began to light along the inner doorway. At the end of the corridor were carved scenes of the life in communion of both races. In the last section, the moment in which the war began was represented, and after this, the rest of the records had been erased. As they progressed, more lights came on. The place gave off a mystical energy that only the shaman and Linnath could detect. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until they reached a dead end. A rectangular room with more inscriptions on the walls told even more stories of harmony between the 2 races. In one of the images, it was implied that despite any differences, both races were blood sisters. At the end of this room, there was an altar with 2 already oxidized cups. They were empty, and it was difficult to know what their contents were generations ago. Linnath had an idea. If both races were considered blood sisters, then the cups should carry the blood of each. There were no Ishari in the group, but Linnath himself was detected, as he had learned in the ruins, as a magic user. Linnath cut her hand with her sword and poured his blood into one of the goblets. Seeing him, the Shektak shaman did the same. Again there were creaks, and then the movement of some kind of machinery. The altar where both cups rested began to descend underground, as before them, a stone door opened and appeared in the wall. What they saw through that door made their blood run cold. Strange, shining crystals next to complex machines that worked with steam did not stop moving. More than a temple, it looked like a huge workshop, and despite the time that had passed, it was still in operation. Or failing that, it had recently been activated and worked as before. They were carefully observing that internal macrostructure of the mountain and realized that the mountain itself was part of it. Millennia in the open had given it an appearance as such, but before that, it must have been something else, since the internal part was actually something too molded and adjusted to the rocky forms for it to be a coincidence. They advanced little by little until they reached the center of the supposed temple, where there was another altar with several crystalline buttons. Linnath could not resist and pressed one of them, causing strange images to be projected before them from that altar that they could not understand. For a few seconds, there were only lines and shapes that frightened them, until those projections that resembled shadow games in the fire took shape. Some balls of various sizes seemed to revolve around a much larger sphere. In one of them, blue, they could read Earth. He pressed another button and saw those rocks scatter in different directions, out of reach of the balls that were spinning around the huge sphere. When he pressed another button, one of the ship rocks appeared, alone, in the middle of an empty immensity. You could see inside where humans were getting sick and dying, while other humans were doing things with other humans and with animals. From those experiments came the Shektak, the Farami, and the Ishari. When there were many of them, they were given tasks and jobs inside the ship rock. There was one last button, and Linnath pressed it. She could see how that ship rock approached a ball similar to Earth and began to spin around. From there, she launched a kind of metallic artifact, and New Earth appeared on top of the ball. After that, the altar went dark. None of those present understood anything he had seen, so they continued searching inside that strange machinery in order to discover how to get to the Tree of Life. After a long time, one of the Shektuk told the rest of the group that he had found something strange. They all went to see him, and what they found made their blood run cold. Several beings like the Great Oracle were inside glass tubes, suspended in a liquid and with their eyes open. The sight shocked them. As they were concentrating on that horrible vision, they heard a voice behind them. 9. The sad truth. The Great Oracle appeared out of nowhere and asked them to listen to him. He told them that they were all part of a very complex plan, lasting thousands of years to adapt the world they lived in for travelers who would take many more thousands of years to arrive. The Tree of Life was actually a machine that would adapt this world to allow travelers to live as they could on their home world. It was a simple code name for something that the primitive minds of the current inhabitants of the world could not understand. The lower Shektuk, the Farami, and the Ishari had to be labor and workers to take care of the tasks that humans could not perform, but an illness ended up speeding up the production plans of these races, which reached heights of intelligence far superior to those desired to the point of becoming equal to humans. Despite the attempts of the intelligence of the Tree of Life to confront the beings of the planet, the objective was not achieved thousands of years ago, so civilization began again, and the adaptation process was halfway done. As the world's deadline drew ever closer, it was decided to make one last attempt at manipulation and create a human capable of forcing a new beginning, Laupa. This human had the intelligence and abilities like her to become the mistress of the world if she had wished, but she fell in love with a high-born human and strayed from her course. It wasn't until the Tree of Life caused an accident to remove that obstacle that Laupa again showed signs of returning to the goal for which she had been created. As there was an alliance between the Shektuk, the Farami, the Ishari, and the humans, it was essential that Laupa join forces with the native races of the world, orcs, goblins, and trolls, along with those remnants of the alliance of people's societies. Free. Unfortunately for the Tree of Life, Laupa was not powerful enough to stop some people's fighting in unity and for a higher and greater good, so she had to get it to reproduce and pass the baton of finishing the job to her. Shoot. Whether by instinct or by simple logic, the victors of the war locked the sun in a dungeon and decided not to kill him, not knowing what consequences this could have on the balance of the world. Linnath was the son of the World Tree. He did not suffer a curse, but rather a blessing in order to survive and carry out the final mission for which he had been created. 10. A difficult choice. The young man did not know how to react. He had always been treated with hate or adoration for being who he was. He had been tricked by the Great Oracle into reaching the Tree of Life and ending the entire known world. Now, in his hands, he had the ability to change the world for the better, or end it together with the machine called the Tree of Life.